Have you ever been to a bowling alley or a roller rink and noticed that your teeth glow under the blacklight? Or worse, maybe your friend's teeth glow and yours don't, which sends you running to buy some whitening toothpaste? That glowing phenomenon is called fluorescence, and it was discovered and named after a mineral called fluorite. Not fluoride, fluorite. But fluorescence has far more sophisticated uses than turning your shoelaces and white t-shirt neon purple. Let me introduce you to the crystal that opened our eyes to a whole new field of science. Before we get to fluorite, I want to shed some light on fluorescence. It's defined as the emission of light after an object has absorbed light of a different frequency. All light contains energy, and when fluorescent molecules get hit by that energy, their electrons absorb it and start to get excited. Excited electrons move up an energy level, which literally means that they jump farther away from the nucleus of their atom. Being close to the nucleus tends to keep an electron kind of grounded, so being farther away puts them in a higher energy state. Excited electrons have a bit more energy than they used to, but everything in nature wants to be at rest whenever possible, so the electrons dump their excess energy almost immediately and sink back into their comfort zone. I never thought I would relate so much to an electron. Energy, of course, can't be created or destroyed, though. It has to go somewhere. So when electrons release all that energy and go back to bed, that energy gets released in the form of light. Here's the thing about fluorescence, though. As the electrons relax, they use some of the energy they gained to do it. And that means when they drop back down, they do so with less energy than the light that hit them. What that means is that the wavelength of light that gets emitted by the fluorescent particles is longer than the wavelength of light that excited them in the first place. Wavelength affects a lot of the properties of light. In visible light, we usually think of wavelength as color. Blues and violets have shorter wavelengths with higher energy. Reds have longer wavelengths and less energy. We cannot see wavelengths that are too red or too violet, wavelengths that we call infrared or ultraviolet light. Blacklights emit ultraviolet light, which has a lot of energy and wavelengths too short for our eyes to see. But when the UV rays of a blacklight hit a white t-shirt, they excite the t-shirt's electrons, and when they drop back down at a lower energy, they make that pretty purple glow that we can see. Now, you notice that when you turn off a blacklight, the glowing stops. This makes fluorescence different from another shiny phenomenon, phosphorescence. Phosphorescence is responsible for glow-in-the-dark paints and plastics, like what's used in those green glowing stars that you might have had in your childhood bedroom, or all of my son's shirts. He has so many shirts that glow so bright he can't even sleep. He has to cover them up. Or they make the room glow. Both fluorescence and phosphorescence actually work with the same principle of excited light. But instead of getting excited up to a higher energy level and immediately dropping down, phosphorescent electrons generally stay excited for a bit longer and burn their energy over time. There are some exceptions to this, but that's a good way to tell them apart in most cases. We've known about fluorescence for a long time, actually way longer than UV lights have been a thing. The Aztecs were actually the first to notice this, observing that a medicine they used to make to treat urinary disorders had an opalescent glow. Then in the 1800s, European researchers started fiddling with fluorescent materials and came up with various hypotheses about what was happening. In 1852, the physicist George Gabriel Stokes wrote extensively about the phenomenon and was the first to name it fluorescence after his main study material, fluorite. But fluorite is definitely not the only fluorescent material out there, and we've come up with tons of ways to take advantage of this brilliant phenomenon. The biggest use is probably the most obvious. We use fluorescence to make fluorescent lights. Yeah, that's why they call them that. And of course, we also use it for black lights and other party trick applications. But we don't just use fluorescence for fun or to see in the dark. Fluorescence is a major cornerstone of a ton of research applications. For example, we can use fluorescence spectroscopy to learn more about the physical properties of chemicals based on how they emit light. And we can use fluorescent dyes to track and label biological molecules in fluorescence microscopy, allowing us to see into cells and tissues. Scientists have gotten so good at the whole fluorescent dye thing that we can even make dyes that react to specific wavelengths of light, so that we can take a look at multiple molecules in the same cell in one imaging section. This is also how we do some diagnostic tests. There are tests where they break up the genes. This isn't in the script. There are tests where they break up the molecules of the genetic code and then they label individual areas of the DNA. And if that DNA is present, then the thing will stick to it, and then they shine a light at it, and if it glows that specific light, when they shine it with a specific wavelength, you know that that area of genetic code is there. So you can test not just for the presence of a disease, but for the presence of specific strains of a disease, which is very cool. Some fluorescent dyes are gentle enough that they can be introduced to cells while the cells are still alive, letting us take live images or videos of biological processes. At least one fluorescent compound, indocyanine green, has even been FDA approved and can be given to patients for medical imaging purposes. There are even some cancer surgeries that use fluorescence to determine if they got the whole tumor out, and there are clinical trials looking at ways to use topical fluorescent compounds to find tumors in the first place. You probably see fluorescent paints and dyes on all sorts of things every day, and those cool things are here lighting up our world thanks to fluorite. But fluorite isn't just an inspiration. Many of these technologies actually use it in their tools or equipment. For example, fluorite is used in lenses for fluorescence microscopy because it's transparent to ultraviolet light. And some cameras and telescopes use fluorite lenses for the same reason. So the same mineral that helped us understand a core phenomenon of light lets us use that property to see the world in a new way. That is a crystal I give a glowing review. And if you're a SciShow Rocksbox subscriber, get your Blacklight ready because this month's mineral is fluorite. Subscribers will get a hunk of the crystal that taught us how to give laser tag arenas everywhere that eerie neon glow. Not a subscriber? Visit scishow.rocks to learn more, and thank you for watching.